Humans of Public Service is all about the people. Today we have Ayushi Roy, who is the Deputy Director of the New Practice Lab at New America.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Brian.
Ayushi, you're in Oakland right now, is that right?
I am. Mm-hmm.
Have you always been there? Did you grow up there? What's the story?
I have not always been here. I was born in Santa Barbara, raised in the Bay Area.
Tell me about growing up in the Bay Area. What is that like?
Growing up in the Bay Area has been really special for me, just by virtue of, having first generation immigrant parents who really found a sort of community here of other first generation Asian immigrants.
Nice. Okay. And what did you study?
I took quite a few languages and really did sort of an area studies major and ended up adding on a human rights major. So I graduated with two degrees.
Could we unpack a little bit what it seems like your first love was language?
Something humbling about the way that languages create different sort of pathways in your brain. I don't know, something very beautiful and poetic and romantic for me about that. I also did grow up in a family where my parents each speak different languages. I learned my mom's languages, I learned my dad's languages, and then, I learned English. My brain enjoys sort of that range of perspectives.
What was your first role out of college or your first job?
I ended up actually starting, at the time, it's silly, you don't think of it as a nonprofit, but I started building something for the very first time on my own. It was my very first foray into technology. And so it was a really big pivot from doing sort of policy, human rights focused work to the same sort of issues, but using a different tool.
So it sounds like before you left college, you caught that public service bug. How did you know public service was an interest of yours?
Both of my parents grew up in recently independent countries, post-colonialism, and the stories that I grew up with at the dinner table were really shaped by political instability, and there's often a lack of service that comes with that. And so that lack of access to service was just really present. That goal of making government work for its people at its core has just really been the through line even today.
Could you tell us a little bit about your journey into an internship with the State Department?
That was my first time being able to serve in any sort of formal capacity. It was just really eye-opening experience for me. I was just so fortunate to be in an office of other women, role models, honestly, of women of color. My boss was I think one of the most senior women of color at the State Department. Having just her perspective and her support and her sort of words of advice in between meetings and coffees was just really formative for me.
You pivoted, worked in technology spaces, but it seems like you made your way back to public service. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what sparked it?
I actually don't see it as a pivot at all, to be perfectly honest. What I realized at some point was I was working on these problems that were so far from home, right? These were problems in Syria, in Jordan, in Palestine, in Israel. And rather than focusing on problems that sometimes felt reduced, right? That sometimes felt remote, I wanted to actually work on those same populations and problems at home. And so I ended up moving back to New York and working with the International Rescue Committee and some of the other migration nonprofits. What I found was I was spending a lot of my time working on changes to language. It was exhausting to work on language changes, to work on ands and thes. And so I learned of this new world where they actually work on sort of tangible delivery every 2 weeks. And that really spoke to me. And I didn't know what that world was. I knew nothing about technology. I taught myself some hacky coding and put together basically a text-based alternative to 311 and 911 and the existing systems in New York that was focused for survivors of sexual assault or interpersonal violence and allowed them to connect with resources directly in that time of crisis. It does feel like I just learned yet another language that more deeply resonated with me to be able to kind of support the same problem.
What would you say so far has been the highlight of your career?
You just paint the picture here. I am in my first suit. I'm in my first button-down starched shirt. Every morning, I would start my day looking through the statistics of how many women and children had safely made it across the border and how many hadn't. Monique Ramguli at the time was the director of work I was involved at the State Department. And I remember Monique once caught me crying at my desk. And she goes, Ayushi, when this stops hurting is when you should no longer be at this job. Decades later, I still think about that. I'm here because it hurts. And I'm here because it hurts for a lot of the other people too who resemble my family.
If you had to summarize what public service means to you, what would you say?
I think it really just simply means doing right by people, making government work.
Ayushi, we're so happy to have had you here today. Best of luck in your current role.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me again. This was really a treat.